What if I told you that the real winner of the naval flashpoint in the Persian Gulf isn't the US Air Force or the Iranian Guard? The actual victor might just be a small group of highly paid marine insurance underwriters sitting quietly in a corner office in London. The A-10 Warthog is currently shredding Iranian speedboats across the water. But here is the brutal tactical reality of the situation. The US Navy is still heavily struggling to secure the world's most critical choke point despite deploying massive fleets to the region. 120 warships is exactly how many Iranian vessels the United States Navy has totally destroyed or disabled since February. 2 carrier strike groups and 8 Aegis destroyers represent $40 billion of naval firepower deployed across 2 massive oceans. And yet, the terrifying result is that the vital Strait of Hormuz is still effectively closed to almost all international maritime traffic. 95% of commercial shipping has completely vanished as 3,000 vessels and oil tankers sit anchored and going nowhere. We did not lose a single ship or a single engagement while eliminating the entire Iranian submarine fleet and every major surface combatant. And yet the shipping lane stays completely shut while the oil stays stuck and the global world economy continuously bleeds billions a week. The reason for this economic disaster is a strategic concept known as a fleet in being, where the enemy avoids destroying our giant carriers. Tehran simply needs to maintain a highly credible threat of cheap attack vessels to keep commercial insurance premiums astronomically high. This conflict is no longer a traditional battle of warships because it has violently mutated into a brutal war of pure economic attrition. The most powerful navy in human history had to pick up the phone and call the Air Force to deploy a legendary Cold War relic for survival. This 50-year-old airplane was originally designed in the 1970s to kill Soviet tanks on the vast and frozen plains of Europe. Top Pentagon officials called it obsolete and unfit for modern warfare right up until the moment they desperately needed it to save the day. To understand why a massive carrier air wing cannot solve a problem that this relic solves instantly, we must first dissect the battlefield. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 nautical miles wide at its narrowest point, but that specific number is highly misleading. The actual playable space for large vessels is a congested 6-mile corridor that defines a terrifying, literal combat environment. The Navy's traditional blue water superiority means absolutely nothing in the dangerously congested and shallow littoral waters. Everything outside that narrow corridor is Iranian territorial water, where a highly unconventional and deadly adversary constantly waits. Iran relies heavily on highly mobile FIAC swarms to overwhelm conventional radar signatures and completely saturate modern defenses. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy operates more than 1,500 fast inshore attack craft right now. These are not massive warships, but small fiberglass hulls where the fastest operational models can easily exceed 70 knots in combat. These tiny vessels are not the type of targets that a multi-billion-dollar conventional radar system was ever designed to easily track. They remain incredibly low to the water and move significantly faster than most luxury pleasure boats racing across the coast of Miami. Every single one of these cheap crafts carries a deadly anti-ship missile possessing enough explosive power to mission-kill a frigate. Their primary naval doctrine is incredibly simple, as they launch 30 to 50 boats to attack simultaneously from every direction. This brutal swarm strategy is designed to blind sophisticated sensors and force a targeted destroyer to make impossible tactical choices. They understand that every defensive missile fired by the Americans costs vastly more than the small boat it ultimately aims to destroy. This entire conflict is fundamentally not about raw firepower, but a brutal financial reality known as the tactical cost exchange ratio. Let us examine the terrifying mathematical equation, where a single sophisticated SM-6 interceptor missile costs over $4 million. Firing a multi-million-dollar defensive weapon at a cheap fiberglass boat is an absolute and undeniable strategic loss for the US Navy. A highly advanced Harpoon missile was engineered to track massive cruisers, rather than cheap composite skiffs doing 70 knots at sea. The mighty F-18 Super Hornet costs $30,000 per flight hour and flies too fast to visually distinguish an enemy vessel. At those extreme speeds, it is essentially impossible to separate a deadly threat from thousands of innocent civilian fishing trawlers. The terrifying swarm doctrine is deliberately engineered to force the massive destroyer to exhaust its expensive vertical launch tubes. They deploy thousands of these disposable fast attack boats against a severely limited number of highly expensive defensive interceptors. A standard phalanx close-in weapon system empties its entire defensive magazine in just 20 seconds and takes 4 minutes to reload. That massive reload window provides more than enough time for a coordinated enemy squadron to completely overwhelm a billion-dollar ship. The Mark 45 5-inch gun system fires roughly 20 rounds per minute, which is highly respectable against a single conventional target. However, that exact same mechanical firing rate becomes totally mathematically hopeless when aggressively targeted by 50 suicide skiffs. Every weapon in the Carrier Strike Group arsenal is carefully designed for open ocean and exceptionally high-value target engagements. This terrifying arithmetic proves that using traditional blue water weapons in a congested brown water environment is financial suicide. The American military proudly brought a highly sophisticated surgical laser into a vicious knife fight that desperately required a shotgun. The legendary A-10 Thunderbolt, fundamentally, is not just a traditional close air support weapon in this specific theater. This specific aircraft, instead, serves as the ultimate economic equalizer and a highly critical counter-attrition asset. That devastating 7-barrel Gatling cannon rapidly fires 30mm depleted uranium rounds at an incredible speed. The exact tactical math reveals that the standard engagement burst costs roughly $130 per bullet. A highly trained pilot, with one burst, destroys a $275,000 Iranian attack boat easily. Achieving that exact same maritime kill with a sophisticated defensive interceptor requires over $5 million total. This shocking calculation represents a massive and categorical shift in the brutal underlying economics of naval engagement. The terrifying mechanical firepower of that heavy cannon makes a continued financial blockade totally unsustainable for Iran. But the brutal heavy cannon is only one small part of this highly favorable tactical equation for the powerful U.S. military. For engaging highly evasive fast boats, mixed with deadly attack drones, the aircraft utilizes laser-guided rocket munitions. The calculated operational cost for each precision-guided rocket shot is approximately $35,000 American dollars. Delivering absolute precision guidance at the approximate price of a standard civilian sedan completely changes the battlefield. The incredible payload capacity allows this slow-moving jet to carry 16,000 pounds of ordnance across 11 hardpoints. For targets lingering at a medium range, the pilot simply fires an infrared-guided Maverick missile to ensure total destruction. This specific missile costs roughly $150,000, remaining significantly cheaper than an interceptor. Every single operational capability of this Cold War legend perfectly aligns with the brutal financial realities of this ocean. The mathematical advantage here is not just a marginal improvement, but an absolute necessity for American maritime dominance. This specific mission profile designates the A-10 for complex strike coordination and reconnaissance above the highly contested water. The slow-moving jet acts as an apex predator, patiently hunting fast vessels that the heavily armored destroyers paint with their sensors. Unlike an advanced F-35 that needs to burn fuel rapidly and return to base quickly, the Warthog provides truly unmatched loiter time. This incredible aircraft stays on station for more than 2 hours while flying continuous racetrack patterns directly over the kill zone. The highly unusual straight wings generate lift much more efficiently at slower speeds than the modern swept wings of a supersonic fighter. When a supersonic fighter crosses the shipping lane at 500 knots, every surface target stays in view for less than 2 seconds. At that extreme velocity, distinguishing an armed Revolutionary Guard boat from a harmless civilian fishing vessel is totally impossible. The A-10 cruises at a remarkably slow 300 knots, giving the experienced pilot 3 times longer to confirm and engage targets. The pilot literally looks out the canopy to see the rocket launchers bolted to the hull before ever pulling the heavy mechanical trigger. This incredible ability to visually distinguish complex threats ensures that the massive naval corridor remains thoroughly sanitized daily. What is actually happening right now above the contested waters is a highly complex, zero-hour tactical breakdown of modern warfare. The Air Force does not operate alone. because the slow jet seamlessly integrates with the MH-60R Seahawk helicopters of the Navy. Those highly advanced naval helicopters constantly paint moving targets and directly feed precise targeting data to the circling jets. When the burning sun finally sets over the Persian Gulf, the terrifying AC-130 gunships arrive to provide continuous night loitering. This unprecedented joint strike operation perfectly combines three different military branches to completely dominate the brown water. Every single aircraft completely covers the specific tactical gap that the other highly specialized military platforms simply cannot fill. This incredible overlapping network of mechanical firepower allows the massive Aegis destroyers to safely preserve their deep magazines. The powerful warships can now save their expensive vertical launch system cells for the massive supersonic threats that truly matter. The sophisticated Aegis combat system remains the ultimate shield of the fleet, but it fundamentally requires breathing room to operate. By outsourcing the chaotic surface battle to the heavy attack aircraft, the fleet commander successfully avoids a catastrophic depletion. A single swarm attack previously possessed the terrifying potential to entirely drain 96 interceptor tubes in just a few minutes. This revolutionary convergence of forces dramatically flips the strategic math, completely neutralizing the primary advantage of the enemy. Iran completely miscalculated their strategy by arrogantly assuming the traditional blue water naval forces would fight this war alone. Their entire swarm doctrine relied on mathematical exhaustion, but they never anticipated this overwhelming web of continuous air support. The American military literally rewrote the tactical playbook overnight, proving that brutal mechanical efficiency defeats sheer numbers. The ultimate conclusion of this complex naval warfare equation is incredibly straightforward for any competent military strategic planner. Selecting the absolutely perfect tactical tool is vastly more important than blindly deploying incredibly expensive modern technology. The powerful Navy was perfectly engineered for deep water operations involving massive capital ships and highly complex long-range weapons. This congested maritime environment demands durable aircraft carrying heavy mechanical cannons and incredibly cheap guided rocket munitions. The ultimate irony is that the perfect tactical weapon is an old jet that the Air Force desperately wants to completely discard right now. Spending $10,000 per kill easily outclasses launching a $5 million defensive interceptor into the dark night sky. The massive American military-industrial complex constantly prioritizes manufacturing incredibly sophisticated and highly expensive weapons. Pentagon officials continuously dream of futuristic laser weapons and stealth bombers flying thousands of miles above the dangerous clouds. However, the brutal reality of the Persian Gulf violently shatters those incredibly expensive dreams with cheap fiberglass suicide vessels. War is fundamentally an economic contest, where the side that exhausts its financial resources first inevitably loses the entire conflict. Iran completely understands this economic reality and designed an entire naval strategy to simply bankrupt the massive American fleet. They do not magically possess the massive industrial capacity to build giant nuclear-powered supercarriers or advanced stealth destroyers. Their incredibly pragmatic engineers mass-produce thousands of tiny disposable boats equipped with exceptionally cheap explosive charges. This asymmetric warfare doctrine forces the massive American military to spend millions of dollars simply swatting away disposable gnats. Without the continuous presence of the slow and heavily armored jet, the entire strait remains an incredibly dangerous and unnavigable trap. A massive global economic depression would violently strike immediately if commercial oil shipments completely ceased passing through there. Insurance companies rely on the guaranteed destruction of these small enemy attack boats to safely underwrite massive commercial cargo. The brutal mechanical roar of the heavy Gatling cannon literally ensures that the global economy continues functioning smoothly every day. Yet military politicians stubbornly refuse to properly acknowledge the undeniable strategic value of this extremely rugged and old airplane. They actively argue that the aging airframe cannot possibly survive a contested airspace dominated by modern surface-to-air missile systems. That specific argument completely ignores the fundamental reality that this particular maritime conflict is not a traditional modern air war. The jet flies extremely low and completely under the protective umbrella explicitly provided by the massive American missile destroyers. It operates as an incredibly lethal extension of the surface fleet rather than a traditional independent strategic aerial bombing asset. Retiring this perfectly adapted machine without a highly capable direct replacement is a completely unforgivable military strategic error. A sophisticated drone carrying a few light missiles simply cannot fully replicate the overwhelming sustained firepower of a heavy cannon. Precision laser weapons are exceptionally wonderful until a massive swarm of 50 vessels suddenly attacks your lone ship simultaneously. When that terrifying scenario finally unfolds, the isolated warship desperately needs an endless stream of cheap, depleted uranium bullets. Engineering reality dictates that you simply cannot successfully hammer a rusted nail utilizing a highly delicate and fragile glass wrench. You must completely respect the hostile environment and quickly adapt your available weapons to incredibly unpredictable, chaotic domains. The narrow shipping lanes simply do not care about the incredible billions of dollars eagerly spent on classified stealth fighter programs. Those dark waters demand raw kinetic energy continuously delivered at a highly sustainable and exceptionally viable economic price point. Our military leadership must carefully study this specific conflict and absolutely refuse to completely abandon proven battlefield tools. The ultimate victor is determined strictly by the brutal logic of cost-exchange ratios rather than the impressive length of a Navy parade. We never blindly worship the sophisticated machine because we strictly worship the brutal mathematical equation of modern naval warfare. The U.S. Air Force is still actively fighting to permanently retire the A-10 Warthog jet by the absolute final end of this current decade. Imagine a terrifying future where this legendary Warthog is finally sent to the dusty boneyard and completely removed from active service. Following that disastrous retirement, a massive lethal swarm of 500 enemy FIACs violently breaches the critical Strait of Hormuz. What specific tactical asset in the modern U.S. arsenal can successfully step in to fill this massive gap without bankrupting the Navy? Let me know your exact tactical solution and highly detailed strategic military plans down in the active comments section right below.